Hello and welcome back to the channel. So out of all the enemies in the game right now, bosses are by far like the most important ones since they are the main focus in a lot of the in-game content. And I feel that a lot of the newer ones have kind of missed the mark by quite a lot. They either feel just kind of underwhelming or just really annoying. Now, when I say bosses, I'm mainly talking about, like the main bosses, like the one you fight at like the end of the story and stuff. Not things like, like the Stingray or like the Sun Dude, because those are more like elite enemies than like main bosses. Though those enemies can also be really annoying. The main problem is a lot of them are kind of just designed to be countered by like one character. Now, bosses have like always had counters, like Death mainly being designed with like Dot in mind, but it still felt like most characters could work against them. Now, if you don't have the counter, you have to work so much harder just to be able to beat them. I think Pollux is the most egregious example of this, since it just straight up does more damage if you have above 50% HP, which only really casters can make your whole team go below 50%. And it also just sets your HP to 1, so you're basically just forced to run a shielder, and you need to lose HP in order to be able to make the boss take more damage. And because it has so much HP, if you aren't able to do that, it just takes so long to kill if you don't interact with the mechanics that it has. Like, on top of that, it having 3 segments really just makes it feel like you either just use Casterus to take like 5 years to kill it. Like, the main problem is that, like a lot of the newer characters, bosses right now are kind of just designed to be able to do everything. Take the Flame Reaver, for example. He attacks fast, has high damage, has good AoE and single target damage, summons a ton of minions, so you basically have to bring AoE. He can go immune, and he is really tanky. And because they can just do so much, a lot of the newer bosses often just put you in situations where it just feels like you can't do anything. Like, especially if they have immune abilities, which, to be honest, I just think is a terrible idea in general, at least in the endgame. Since the endgame is based around, cycles and timers, and having a move where you just can't hit the boss for a bit, basically just forcing you to waste cycles, can be pretty frustrating. Like, on top of that, the health is still a pretty big problem, because giving bosses a huge health bar doesn't make them harder. It just makes them more tedious, since you're just doing the same thing over and over again, and just saying the same moves over and over until you eventually just win or you just die. Like, they shouldn't just have no health, because then you get the problem with a lot of the bosses in the story, where they are way too easy. But right now it is on like the opposite end of the spectrum, where it just feels like you're just hitting a brick wall until it dies, which is just really annoying. Also kind of have the other end of this problem, where bosses just kind of end up being underwhelming if they don't do enough. Like, I think like the Ichor Memo Sprite, yeah, he is countered by shields, but I feel like he just doesn't have much to make him really stand out. He just feels like another boss, and that's it. Even the two like best bosses, I think, from version 3, Nicodor and Aquila, still don't really feel amazing. They just feel like okay. I think like what makes them good is that they feel the least designed to be beaten by just one thing, and don't just have like a ton of mechanics just for like the sake of it, Like, Nicodor attacks fast, but not so fast that it feels like you just can't do anything. Faster characters are better against him because of like the war armor thing, but it doesn't feel super detrimental if you don't interact with it. But even then, he still feels like he just like reused some stuff, like him taking your HP and like absorbing it kind of just feels like what Death does, but just slightly differently, And Aquila is like a bit harder to judge since she hasn't showed up in APOC yet at all. Overall, I do like her. The whole meter mechanic is at least interesting, since a lot of different stuff can work against it. I would say she is a bit too easy, but that is mainly just because we only have the farming stage to go off of, unlike all of the other bosses. And like, bosses in the game have always kind of had problems, basically since the game has came out. I mean, a bunch of them have had, newer versions and have been updated. Even ones in like 1.0, like Cocolia, have been updated and changed over time to be given, better stuff to make them more interesting to fight. Like, Aventurine changing how his stack mechanic works to make less obnoxious to play. But the version 3 bosses, I think, just have felt the most kind of bullshit, I think is the best way to put it. I think that's kind of a symptom of just how strong the newer characters are, since, they just are so strong that the bosses have been kind of having to get stronger to account for that. Like, action advance is a lot more prevalent than it has ever been, so bosses are becoming a lot faster and having a lot more actions to be able to make up for that. But characters are also doing a lot more damage than before, so bosses get more HP so they don't just get one shot. But we also have a lot more survivability, so bosses get more damage. And it just creates this like constant loop where, you know, the characters get stronger, so the bosses have to get stronger as well, so they don't just feel way too easy. But then because of that, characters get even more powerful, and it just ends up making the older characters even worse, because you're only designing the bosses around the new characters. Like, most of the old bosses, even the ones that people hate, at least felt like they had something that you could play around. Like, Hule does attack a lot, but each attack at least does pretty low damage, so you can sustain if you have a good enough, you know, sustain character. But a lot of the bosses and content in general now really feels like just kill the enemy before they kill you, especially with how much more prominent like triple support teams are becoming now. Like, it is kind of a shame too, since we have gotten new bosses every single patch, so it does feel like there is like a new enemy to fight and like new interesting things to go against every patch. But I think because of that, it's kind of making their moves not as fleshed out as they could be. It just feels like they're just doing the same couple of things over and over again. I think that they could maybe like, take a bit more their time with it, but even then, most of the bosses, they do kind of make sense in the story, so I don't really know how you would fix that, you know? I mean, even some of the newer bosses have gotten updated versions, like the Flamers of the original fights were kind of underwhelming, which to be honest, just kind of made them even more annoying, but still. On top of that, a lot of bosses have felt very similar to one another. Like, you know, they all have like some sort of AoE move, a like single target attack, a big like AoE like charge minion or like multiple parts to them. We haven't had a single boss that hasn't just been like the boss itself. They always have some sort of like minion or someone, which I guess is to try and make erudition better, but it just makes like single target characters so much worse. They all just feel like they do the same thing of just stop them from using their like nuke move, and at the end of the day, I do still like these bosses to some extent, and I do think some people just want them to just be easy, which I don't agree with. They at least feel somewhat challenging, but they don't just feel obnoxious, which they just do right now. And they do need to try and make them at least a bit more like broad in what can be beaten with them, because right now a lot of them are just designed to be beaten with just like one character in mind, which does make sense to some extent, especially if they're connected in like the story in some way, but it shouldn't feel like the only good option, you know? But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.